How's it going, everyone? It's Avi from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video, we're going to determine the probability you're going to see a colder and snowier than average winter this season. So, there's been a lot of questions regarding the possibility each area of the United States will see a colder winter this season, because although winter forecasts do state that a specific area might see a colder winter or a warmer winter, a lot of people are still wondering the exact possibility that'll happen, because of course, just because the certain winter forecast says it's going to be colder and snowier than average does not really give a good representation of the possibility it'll be colder than average. So in this video, I want to give you guys a bit more of a detailed forecast regarding the probability you're going to see a colder winter. But first, let's take a look at the temperature anomalies for strong to medium to moderate El Ninos compared to the long-term average between 1991 and 2020. We've been talking about this over the past several videos, and you clearly see that much of the southern United States experiences temperatures that are much colder than average during a strong to moderate El Nino, with the temperature anomalies hovering anywhere between 1 to 3 degrees below average, which is a pretty big anomaly when you really think about it. That means that there's going to be plenty more Arctic blasts in a lot of these areas where it's simply colder than average during a stronger to moderate El Nino. So you definitely will feel the effects of an average winter that's 3 degrees below average. So you definitely need to prepare for that. And in the areas where it is expected to be colder than average, that's where the probability of a colder and snowier winter is also a lot higher. So I'll say for the southeast, including the Rocky Mountain ranges, where you also experience a lot of snow, which I'm going to show you guys in the El Nino snowfall anomaly map in just a second. In those areas, you should expect a high possibility of a colder and snowier El Nino. And for the northern United States, it's a little bit closer to average temperature anomaly, so the chance is certainly lower that it's going to be colder and snowier than average. And in fact, it should be pretty unlikely to see a colder and snowy than average winter right around the northern United States. So you definitely want to keep that in mind as we approach the winter time frame. However, we're going to take a look at several different factors as well that play a role in determining the probability of this forecast. So here's a snowfall anomaly map for El Nino years compared to the long-term average, and we clearly see much more snow than usual typically happens right around just to the west, the east of the Rocky Mountain ranges of Colorado. This extends into New Mexico as well, so the Albuquerque area should more likely than not experience a colder and snowier than average winter. I'll say that the chance is extremely likely right around the Albuquerque area this winter, including areas a little bit further eastward as well into Kansas, northwestern Texas and Oklahoma, and extending into Nebraska as well. These are the areas where it's likely extremely likely to see a colder and snowier than average winter. And this extends into the southeast as well, where you typically experience a little bit more snow than usual during El Nino years. So in the southeast as well, it should be very likely you will see colder and snowier than average conditions this winter. This includes cities like Atlanta and extending into Birmingham, New Orleans as well. While you might not necessarily see snow in New Orleans, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it likely will be colder this winter right around the New Orleans area, and this includes Dallas, Texas as well, and even the northeast, especially the coastal northeast, that's pretty much right up along the Interstate 95 corridor. It's simply slightly more snowy than average during El Nino years, which makes me believe that a lot of the bigger cities along northeast will have a high possibility of a colder and snowier winter this year. And for the northern United States, we clearly see a lot less snowfall than usual, especially right around the Pacific Northwest, extending into the northern Midwest as well. So in these areas, the probability is low you're going to experience a colder and snowier than average winter. Another big pattern we need to take a look at that will definitely help determine what type of winter you're going to see in each area of the United States is a Pacific North American oscillation, or the PNA pattern. And as you could clearly see, we're most likely going to hover right around the neutral phase and into the more positive phase in the during the later portion of the winter into late December and early January, and this extends into the middle of January as well. So what this means is that the eastern half of the United States, temperatures should be colder than average. It should be snowier than average with lower pressures along the eastern half. Let me show you guys what happens during a positive pattern in this map right now. Since we're in a positive, we're expected to be in a positive PNA pattern for much of the winter. We see that the air pressure should be lower around the eastern half of the United States, which will enhance the northerly flow to bring the Arctic air further southward and create very cold and likely more snowy than average conditions right over the eastern half of the United States, which I believe will make it very, very likely it's going to be colder and snowier than average winter pretty much for the entirety of the East Coast, and even extending a little bit further westward as well. But for the West Coast, we see that during a positive phase, we see a strong ridge build right over the West Coast, and that typically brings much warmer and drier than average conditions. And I especially think it's going to be more prominent right over the Pacific Northwest, where during an El Nino, we see already a strong ridge that typically builds right over this area. So I expect the effects to be more visible right around the Pacific Northwest. The Southwest, I think it's going to be a little bit closer to average, maybe slightly still below average, despite the fact that we're going to be in a positive phase, because during an El Nino, we see a much stronger Pacific jet that moves through the Southwest, which typically brings a lot more storm systems and colder temperatures right over the southwestern portion of the United States. So I do believe that it'll be closer to average around the Southwest, while the Northwest, it'll be most likely much warmer and drier than average, making the possibility of a colder and snowier winter very unlikely right around the Pacific Northwest, including cities like Seattle and Portland. Also, the drought conditions in the lower 48 play a role in determining what type of winter you're going to see, because typically if there's a drought, not only is it of course drier than average, but it's a lot warmer than average, since the dry surface heats up a lot more quickly than a moist surface, which allows the temperatures to rise a lot more during the daytime. And as you can clearly see, the areas that are getting impacted pretty hard from drought conditions include portions of the southeast, extending into the western portion of the Mississippi River Valley, and extending into portions of the Pacific Northwest as well. So for the Pacific Northwest and Northern Midwest, I expect not only the drought conditions to stay, but continue to get worse, thanks to the fact that we're going to be in an El Nino, which already brings drier and warmer than average conditions right over the Pacific Northwest and the North Midwest. But also, we're going to see a positive PNA pattern, so the likelihood of a ridge building will make it very unlikely for it to be colder and snowier than average over this area. And then for the Southeast, while you guys are currently in somewhat of a severe drought, especially closer to Louisiana and Mississippi, I eventually do expect the El Nino pattern to take shape, as well as a positive PNA pattern to take shape to remove this drought by the time we approach the midwinter time frame. So while I will still say it's more likely, we're more likely going to see a colder and snowier than average winter in the Southeast, I wouldn't put as much confidence in that as other areas such as Colorado or the Northeast, where the drought conditions, at least for now, aren't as severe. But I still do expect it most likely to be a colder and snowier than average winter over the Southeast, because of course that's simply what happens during an El Nino. So here's my probability map of a colder and snowier than average winter for the lower 48 of the United States. So along the northeast coast, I expected the probability to be very high, extremely likely for a colder and snowier than average winter due to several different factors, such as the fact that we're going to be in a strong to moderate El Nino, which typically leans a little bit more towards the northeast, experiencing colder temperatures than usual, which I believe will contribute to the snowier than average conditions as well, to make the probability very high for a colder and snowier than average winter along the northeast coast. But also, it's due to the fact that we're going to be in a positive P&A pattern for much of the winter, which means that we're likely going to see a lot more jet stream dips to enhance the probability to be very high right up along the northeast coast. And based on what we just saw with the El Nino snowfall anomaly map, it's typically more concentrated over the northeast coast rather than the interior northeast, where it's a little bit closer to average to slightly below average when it comes to snowfall, at least in the interior northeast. But that's not the case for the coastal northeast, where you typically experience more snowfall than usual right up along the Interstate 95 corridor. So I do believe that'll play a big role in making the probability extremely likely for a colder and snowier than average winter. And then just south of that, I'm including Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina as well. At least for a colder winter, I definitely won't say it'll snow in Florida. Definitely not saying that. It could, I'll say it's more likely to snow in Georgia and South Carolina, but overall across the board, it should be colder and colder than average right around this area of the southeast, because just like I said, we're going to be in a positive P&A pattern, far more jet stream dips, and a strong Pacific jet move that's expected to move through during an El Nino will bring a lot more storm systems to prevent the sun from radiating on the surface and raising the average temperature right over the southeast. So I do expect this area of the southeast to be extremely likely when it comes to a colder and snowier than average winter. And while I would say the same for areas like Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas, the fact that I didn't put extremely likely is due to the fact that there's still a drought going on, and while I did say I do eventually expect it to go away thanks to an El Nino pattern, I don't expect it to be very rapid. So there could be that possibility during the early part of the winter time frame where it's still relatively dry, relatively warmer than average, because El Nino really hasn't kicked in until later during the winter. So I will say the chance is a little bit lower right around Texas and Louisiana, but still very likely for a colder and snowier than average winter. I definitely won't go against historical data of what El Nino years have shown us, so I still think it's very likely over those areas. Extremely likely right in between New Mexico and Colorado, especially in the higher elevations, because like we saw in the snowfall anomaly map, when it comes to El Nino years compared to the long-term average, we see a lot more snowfall than usual right over this area. So it's extremely likely you're going to see colder and snowier than average conditions. And then for the southwest coast, including western Arizona and into southern California, I expect it to be slightly leaning towards a likely phase, but this could easily be wrong as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Southern California experiences a slightly warmer than average winter, because we are going to be in a positive P&A pattern, which typically does bring drier and warmer than average conditions over the west coast. However, we're still in an El Nino, so the Pacific jet stream might outweigh the fact that we would be in a positive P&A pattern. So I will say it's still leaning a little bit slightly towards a likely phase, but don't be surprised if that doesn't end up being the case. And of course, for the Pacific Northwest and portions of the northern Midwest, I think it's going to be unlikely and very unlikely closer to the Pacific Northwest, thanks to the fact that we're going to be in El Nino and a positive P&A pattern, which is just a perfect storm of strong ridging right over the Pacific Northwest to prevent a lot of snowstorms and cold temperatures to move in. So don't expect a colder and snowier than average winter for the Pacific Northwest as well as the northern Midwest this winter. But this is my entirety of my forecast. So if you want even more in detail forecast regarding the percentage probability you're going to experience a colder and snowier than average winter, just make sure to comment down below, and I'll make sure to give you guys a more in detail look at the probability or the percentage you're going to experience a colder and snowier than average winter this season. So make sure to comment down below if you're interested. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.